everyone, welcome back. Yeah, alright. Stojas, vyklúčiť stoj. Alright, stop it. Yes, everyone, welcome back by a new podcast. Happy Monday. Yes, everyone. All my comrades, communists, socialists, whatever you are, not the fascists, maybe a Russian nationalist, but of course, my great Soviet comrades, communist socialists, welcome by a new podcast. And today I'm going to tell about the fall of the Soviet Union and, of course, Black October. Well, I also go check it out on my video clip that I made, Soviet Life 1970s. Hope you like it all. My new name is Soviet Patriot or Avmobin Afghanka. Afghanka is my rapper name. Go also check out my album song. Yes, let's talk about the fall of the USSR because there's many people who don't understand. I saw also some video YouTubers who got it correct, but I'm gonna tell it from my parents, their part of their story, because my parents were there that day when the USSR collapsed, and it became the Russian Federation as we know today, Российской Федерации. So, let me tell you about what the hell happened that day after two assholes destroyed the whole country of 15 republics, 15 sisters, as my mom called it, apart. And one guy also slammed it with a hammer, bam, bam, more, as my mother also said. Those two assholes were Mikhail Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin. Now, who were they? If you know from history class, I think I don't have to tell you who these two persons were. Gorbachev was the last president and the traitor who sold their country of my mom to the fucking United States. And she still hates him also. Well, he's dead for many years right now. But she still hates it, as my father too. Well, my father's from Afghanistan, probably you know. But yeah, he also didn't like because Afghanistan was falling apart. Because the Taliban took over the wood that once was the Mujahideen. The last president, Muhammad Najibullah, was hanged on the traffic lane. I'm not going to show that picture. So yeah, what the hell happened during December 1991 and Black October 1993? Well, if you know about this prospect, of course, this subject or this case, my parents were there. They were married in 1992. That was after the fall of the USSR. Yeah, they weren't married in the Soviet Union. My parents were married in 1992. So what my mom told me and my father, they were there all the time, all the weeks, all the months, and of course those years when they saw all the change in Russia itself. Soviet Russia was then replaced with the Russian Federation. Mikhail Gorbachev made many mistakes and many people here liked him because he's perestroika glasnost. My mom and my father said they're dumbasses, they're bastards. They know no fucking idea what that means. So let's go tell you what perestroika and glasnost means. If you know what it probably means, but perestroika means more reforms. But his reforms made many people really angry, not only in Russia, but also in the rest of the Soviet Union, because they've seen, well, in the rest of the Soviet Union, many people were happy with it in the Baltic states and Poland, because I saw many videos also when the Soviet tanks were rolling in, and the Soviet soldiers finally also beat their asses, because these people were traitors too. And the United States also made a deal with Gorbachev to sell his country. Now, this was not Reagan, it was George H.W. Bush himself who made that deal. My father told me. And also, there were appointments made, that also happens now today with the war in Ukraine, that NATO shouldn't build their bases in Ukraine. But they want still, because that's one of the things that European people here in Western Europe doesn't know. And they should know that. Why Putin himself don't want that. So, let me tell you from the beginning, of course. After Gorbachev resigned from his position as the last chairman of the USSR, The country was fallen. Many tanks, Soviet army soldiers were rushing to Baku, to Georgia, to Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, of course, where it all happened in that radio station. Yeah, they were really angry for what happened. Of course, Gorbachev did his best, but to his perestroika that made it so much worse to open freedom and, of course, press, that was his fatal mistake he ever made to create that fucking idea. To create that idea was even his dumbest mistake. Then glasnost came, that means more with glass and broken, more democratic elections freedom. That was also his other dumbest mistake he ever made. So Gorbachev was the first destroyer of the Soviet Union. Then Yeltsin came, the drunkard, if you can see him on the left, on the left. He was one who was he was enjoying his vodka more than anyone else or any problem in the whole country. In the whole Soviet Union, he didn't really care. He was also, at the speech when he said to Gorbachev, and you're going to read. They two also didn't like each other, and the KGB itself was also planning for a coup to remove Gorbachev and Yeltsin from their positions. That's something what people doesn't know. But in one of the simple history, that guy, he knows, of course, how it happened. So the coup began in 1991, but that failed, and the communists lost their power. So yeah, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, and I think that was one of his baddest mistakes. Well, his mistake, also his third mistake he did. If he shouldn't have resigned, and the KGB took over the power, and the Soviet army could control all of it, then the other guy, Alexander Rutskoy, was then the chairman of the Communist Party, should be elected as the new president of the Soviet Union. Of course, you have also Gennady Zhuganov, who is my favorite, guy in Russia, of course, because he's the leader of the Communist Party. I like that guy. He's a great guy. But yeah, you have now Putin, of course. Yeah, I don't really like him, but I don't say I hate him, but I also don't like him either because, yeah, he's a typical capitalist and a corrupt man himself. But he's a strong leader, and yeah. My mom doesn't like him, my father likes him, but yeah, you know. But let's go back to the point. Well, what happened in 1993? Black October, there was a lot of chaos, of course, in all of Moscow when my parents were there, and they saw it on the news, on TV, they saw it in the windows. Of course, they weren't in the center. They were a little bit more outside in the more other districts of Moscow when you saw tanks, soldiers on the street. Yeah, it was everywhere chaos. It were the baddest days that Russia ever had in the 90s. If you're looking at Russian history, Russian Federation history, yeah. The Russian people don't like the history because of the 90s because it were a lot of fucking bad, chaotic times. Wars, corruption, mafia was everywhere. My mother also told that in the end of the 80s there were many bandits, and that caused a lot of trouble. And well, maybe drunk people, but that was just more in the end of the 80s. Well, yeah, you also have them. Yeah, so what can I tell you? Well, my father and my mom also survived it, thank God. And of course, it was not safe on the streets. You know, the new Russian police, yeah, they were corrupt. And they also were, loyal to the mafia themselves. They were working together. So, believe me, you can ask me, my mom, but she even would said it. The Russian police were not to be trusted. And they were corrupted as the bandits themselves. They were the thieves themselves. They also stole money from people, which, today they also do, because they're really corrupt. But the Soviet police wasn't that. No. The Soviet police was really different than them. They were not corrupt. So, what can I tell you? So what happened, of course, you see the picture, of course, you saw the picture, Russian tanks firing at the Constitution building, where the last Communist Party members were also declaring war. Yet what was his name, Gasbulatov, who was one of the party members, and Alexander Ruslan Khasbulatov. Yeah, they too were against Yeltsin and Gorbachev because they knew that they were traitors, and they were, of course, they were selling the country to the United States, and of course, putting more Western influence. And that was one of their mistakes. But, for the Russian people today, they don't really bother about it because, of course, of the war in Ukraine. And, man, there are many Russian people who still miss the USSR. I'm not talking only about the communists. I'm also talking about the civilians. The older generation, of course, they really miss those times because they were the best times ever. In Stalin's time, it was a lot of depression, but it was great. It was great, but a lot of depression. But then when Khrushchev, and Brezhnev came in my mom's time, my mom said it were the best times ever. So let's go back to where we were. There were also firefights on the streets, snipers, soldiers, also mercenaries. What I know I don't believe they were mercenaries because that wasn't possible. My mom wouldn't believe that, and my father were no mercenaries, so that's bullshit. There were Russian soldiers fighting against the communist so-called rebels who wanted to take back the control in Russia, and of course wanted to get away, arrest. Of course, Gorbachev was arrested. Yeltsin was enjoying and asking the tanks, brigade generals, can you help me? I need some help. And instead of, democracy, he used tanks. That's Russian, mentality, I think. So he used really violent force and, the common to try to surrender the communists at firing at a building, which my mom and my father don't like that. They're really angry and hatred against what Yeltsin was doing. Yeltsin was the real destroyer of the USSR, while Gorbachev was the fucking traitor of the whole country. Yeah, they said themselves, and they also still hates them. They both are dead for many years. Yeltsin died in 2007. Gorbachev died in 2021, I still believe. So, my father and my mom are really really happy that they both died because they both destroyed the greatest, mightiest, communist socialist country that ever existed on this planet. Yeah, my mom also said, we Russians are destroyers, Germans are builders. If you, compare these two the two mentalities, she said it herself, Russians destroyed communism and socialism at the end by these two dumb mistakes and misunderstood of the, Soviet people. But, I don't really understand why did Yeltsin doing this, sending tanks and soldiers and just destroying everything because he enjoyed more the vodka than anyone else, also laughing, making laughing jokes with Bill Clinton in the time, and then the USSR existed forever. So, we then had the war in Chechnya that broke out, the Russian-Chechen War in 1993, and then the real bad times came. Not just in 1991, but in 1993, the really bad time happened. So my parents decided to escape and flee Russia also from these, things. These results, or you can say it, that's why they have fled, all these circumstances. So, it was maybe really, if the KGB or the Soviet army that still wasn't most controlled by Yeltsin, if they could turn themselves against him or stood at the side of the communists or just at the Soviet party, maybe Gorbachev, if they turned against him, then he never should have let this happening out of chaos and a war that broke out, a coup, and then this was never happened. And I believe that the Soviet Union also still existed. It maybe not will be really being the great, of course, the whole Soviet republics, but the Russian Soviet Federation would still exist today, and Putin was never at power. Because, yeah, the communists would still power. Maybe Putin will be at power, but I don't believe that Putin will be at power because he's not a communist or, yeah, socialist. So he would never would be even rise to power. So that would never happen, believe me. I know what I'm saying. Ask my parents, they also would agree and saying the same thing. If Black October never happened, if the Soviet reforms also did never happen, then the Soviet Union was still existed today. Maybe some republics will declare themselves independent, but I don't believe that the Soviet government would let that happen because Gorbachev did his best, but he failed. He literally failed because the KGB also lost trust in it because the KGB of Vladimir Khrushchev, who was the head and the chairman of the KGB, the commissar, the general, didn't like his reforms, and he knew what Gorbachev was doing. And of course, he knew he was a traitor. And Yeltsin was just enjoying his vodka and dancing with wives, and you can see in the picture. He was really drunk. He was every day drunk. He drank so much that, like my mom said one time, he was sleeping with a bottle of vodka and saying dumb, ridiculous things on TV. My potatoes are the best productive quality of the whole world. He once said that in a news message. And he also said, today I'm a sad balloon, because he was so drunk that he didn't know what he was doing. Not only just that, also at the press conference in 1995, he was even so fucking drunk that the Clinton didn't have that in mind. But the Russian people, also there was one reaction of a Russian guy on YouTube. I can tell you this, I can tell you this for sure. He was 100% drunk at that moment. Yeah. He was it all the time. He was also known, his nickname, the hammer of the Soviet Union, because, yeah, he literally smashed the whole country apart. Gorbachev betrayed the country, and Yeltsin destroyed the whole country apart. So the destruction came from his side, and the betrayal from Gorbachev came from his side. If these two gentlemen never came, then the Soviet Union was never tearing apart. If I'm looking today, if why I'm telling you also this, because I don't like this war in Ukraine that is still going on since 2023 when Putin invaded Ukraine. Many Ukrainians also don't like that war. They're not only hate Russians. I don't believe that many Ukrainians are being brainwashed by Zelensky's media, is by Putin's media, but they should know and understand, as my mom once said many times, that we were brothers in that time and always were. But now there's this fucking ridiculous war. We need to still watching how many Ukrainians and Russians dying. Yeah, that's propaganda maybe, but also war and politics that we can solve, but only I think it is the best that Putin should be overthrown and we can take over the power. Of course, the Communist Party would take back the power and make peace. Look at 1970. What happened to the Tsar was the same result. He was overthrown by the Bolsheviks. So Putin, the capitalist president, should also be overthrown by the new Russian Communist Party by helping of the military, because the military is the most strongest power in the country. So what they have to do, they just have to maybe not pay, but just overseeing and convincing the army that Putin is the bad guy and not just Zelensky. Zelensky he's not really the bad guy at all, but I see more Putin as a bad guy. Zelensky, I don't like him. But yeah, he also forgot that his grandpa was a Jew also for the World War II. But I don't really like Putin. Putin is a corrupt capitalist leader who only steals money, as my mom said, And he also take it in his own pocket, building a palace in Crimea, nothing, and he doesn't give something to his people, but his people have to work or just being poor and living in the conditions as we know today. Bad houses, bad streets, and also many old flats or buildings that are not being repaired as the roads. Yeah, Russia is a chaotic, systematic country, as my mom said. Our system is rotten from inside and chaotic. But yeah, the country is still mighty strong, but I hope one day, maybe she also would wish that the communists would take over back Russia and turn it again into the new Soviet Union, new Soviet Russia, as Vladimir Lenin also wished and also did. As it happened to the Tsar, it will happen to Putin. It is possible, believe me. I know what I'm saying. It is possible. Because my mom and my father knew the weakness of of the leader inside the Kremlin, of the Duma, as they called it. That weakness is the army and the military. You saw what Yeltsin did. And the communists surrendered to him. So that same thing can happen to Putin. But to do that, you need to organize and create a whole military force and much generals to create a new second revolution. You know, Russian people don't want that because they're only busy, of course, with influencers and busy, enjoying their social media lives, and they're just their normal life. But they should know if the second Russian revolution would happen after Putin's death, because Putin is now 75, 76 years old, I believe. If one day he would die, because he would have a follower, but I would believe that the second Russian civil war or revolution will come, and I hope that will happen, so we can finally overthrow him from his fucking capitalist new czarist throne. And we can take back over the power and make peace with Ukraine and of course America, and we have solved it. We can take back the communist idea, or socialist ideas. We can reform the country and take back all the property from the state to the people. And we finally have built a new Soviet Russian Federation. What the communists did in 1991, what they tried, but they failed. And in 1993, they also tried to save the last parts of the Soviet Union, so it would be still the Soviet Russian Federation. But yep, Yeltsin destroyed it all. And they came outside with white flags. Alexander Rutskoy was the main leader German. He surrendered, and the gospel out too. And the Soviet Union was ceased to exist. After that, the Chechen War began, and the Russian soldiers had to fight the war in Chechnya, which became the most chaotic fucking bad shit war the Russian people or the Russian army ever have been through. Believe me, Chechnya was a hellhole. You fought Afghanistan? No. Well, in that time, the Chechnya, the Chechens were the really most difficult, dangerous enemies in that time. What I also know that some Ukrainian nationalists also fought on the side of the Chechens, as they doing also today, as they did in 2014 when Ukraine had trouble after the Maidan Revolution. Yeah, I will talk that in the next podcast. This was the truth, and this was my podcast about the fall of the USSR and the result and the Black October when my parents were there. Thank God they survived it, or I never maybe was born. Maybe I think I was born in Russia, not in the Netherlands where I'm living. But yeah, this was the whole podcast and the truth and facts, how the Soviet Union collapsed, what happened in aftermath in 1993, and of course in today, modern Russia, or ex-Soviet Russia. So that's it, my friends. If you have questions, let me know about this podcast. This is, a podcast that I tell you because I'm at this age, my parents told me a lot about the Soviet Union, Russia, of course, my mom, who is from the country. And she told me much of course, my father. And they're really lucky that they've survived 1993 because many people have died. And, Yeltsin he was blamed for his actions, but he didn't really care. He didn't care because he was busy with establishing the new democratic Russian Federation. And he didn't care about what happened about these victims. He didn't care because he always fought about the vodka. Yeah, so that's it, my friends. Hope you like my podcast and let me know what you think. And also for the comrades, All the pro-workers, proletarians unite, and I hope one day that if Putin will die, we will take over Russia and we make Russia back into the Soviet Union. Maybe not all countries, but we'll see. Belarus will join us, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Also, I think they will, because the Nagorno-Karabakh wars that also happened after was also the result. Much death, much civilian casualties. And why did it all happen? Of the fall of the USSR. What happened in Lithuania? Many dead people, the fall of the USSR. In Azerbaijan, Georgia, you can search it yourself. So that's it, my friends. Hope you like this podcast. Maybe Ukraine will join the Soviet Union again. I don't believe so, but I think it's better that we split the country. Western Ukraine goes to NATO, Eastern Ukraine goes to the Soviet Union, and we build a buffer zone, or a DMZ, demilitarized zone. I think that's the best solution we can do, also for this war right now, because there is no other fucking solution. Because NATO wants to go further and build more bases in Ukraine, and Putin don't want that. So what is the best option for that problem? What I have created, build a DMZ. Look at North Korea and South Korea. Look at North and South Korea. They never had a war after 1953, after Stalin's death. And since then, they never attacked each other again. So if Ukraine will be split up, if the Soviet Union will be recreated, then this conflict will finally be over. I hope they'll so. But we'll see. So let me know, my friends, comrades. This was the podcast of, the next podcast, I will talk about the Ukrainian people and their history, because there are many things in their history are not correct and really wrong. And I'm going to tell you about it. I'll see you in the next podcast, my friends, comrades. Have a nice evening. До свидания. Я буду вижу тебя скоро. I said in translation, goodbye, or I'll see you soon.